Why don't I can somebody, Davud, can you turn off that, just the first one. Thank you. Great. Thanks, Cynthia. Okay. Fourth muscle lecture then. This is going to be the comparison of the three types of muscle. There's three types of muscle in the human body, right? And you remember these from our tissue lectures, right? Cardiac, skeletal, and smooth. And we've investigated skeletal muscle. We know about the muscle fibers and what they do. We know how they're bundled into muscles. So we want to take what we know about this, about skeletal muscle then, and try to apply it to an understanding of cardiac and smooth in this lecture. So you have this handout, right? And we have all these boxes that we want to fill out. So let's start right here at the top, and let's take cell structure, the size of skeletal muscle cells or muscle fibers. How would we describe the size? Long. How long? Okay, yeah. Remember this illustration? Remember where we said if it's the size of a football, it's many, many football fields long. This is extreme, okay? So we'd say, Josh was right on, it's extremely long. These cells are unbelievably long in the cellular world. And we described all about how they got there, but that's just the basic fact relating to its size. How would we describe the nucleus characteristics here? Multinucleated, right? If you look at the fibers here, right? When you see muscle fibers, you're going to see regularly spaced nuclei that are left over from the fusion of the cells. So we're going to say multinucleated. Okay, what would we describe the shape of these muscle fibers? Okay, what's the shape kind of word that we would use? Okay, cylindrical. A cylinder has that round shape and it's long, right? Cylindrical. Okay, and where is this muscle located? Is it in the heart? No, right? Right? It's basically, we say it's attached to the bones, isn't it? Right? Which is why we call it skeletal. And I mentioned this earlier, it's not every single case is it bones. It could be the skin of your face. It could be one muscle attaching to the other, but it's basically the muscle that moves our body, the muscle that's associated with the skeleton. So those are some of the basic cell structures there. Let's get a little deeper into it now. Okay, let's look at, remember this picture here where we were looking at the myofibrils and the sarcomeres and all of that. Does this have sarcomeres? Right. The myofibrils are organized into sarcomeres. When there's a question mark here at the end of this, it's basically give me a yes or a no on that. Right? Is this striated muscle? Right? Remember when we saw this? What does striated means? Stripes, right? Means that it looks striped. So yes, we would say yes. Now, this question, we really haven't dealt with this before, so I need you to think through this one to give me an answer. I'm wondering if the cell structure is interconnected. Now, maybe you remember a little bit about this picture. By saying interconnected, what I'm asking is, are the muscle fibers here connected to one another? If this one contracts, would it cause this one to contract? Is every muscle fiber isolated from one another, or are they interconnected? What do you think? What do you think? You think they're isolated? You think? Okay, and I don't mean that there's connective tissue bundling them together, but are these two cells, these two muscle fibers connected so that one would influence the other? Okay, that's good. We've got some no's and some yeses. The answer here is no. Okay? Every muscle fiber here is totally and completely separate from one another. Now, what that does, now, several muscles fibers may contract at the same time only because the neuron is connected to more than one. See all the ones that they colored a little darker here? We're pretending that those are all connected to a single neuron. So if this neuron brings a signal down, all these will contract, but not because they're connected to each other, only because they're all connected to the same neuron. Well, these ones contract here. These may do nothing. And this is how the brain controls the strength of the muscle. Right? If we contracted one and it influenced all of its neighbors, we just get a total contraction. The brain controls the strength of the contraction by recruiting. We call it recruitment. If you want to fight a big war, you recruit a lot of soldiers. If you want to fight a little skirmish, you just recruit a few. If I go to lift, something very light like this, I don't go, I don't use all my muscle fibers to lift this thing. I only need a few muscle fibers to lift this. But if I'm going to lift something very heavy, I'm going to have to recruit a lot of muscle fibers. My brain calls on as many of these as it needs to do the job. Parkinson's is totally different. That's a brain problem there. It doesn't have anything to do with the muscles themselves. But do you start to see the picture? Your brain is always guessing too. Have you ever misguessed the weight of something? Maybe you're moving boxes of things in your house and you fill it full of books, and then you leave it for a few minutes and somebody comes along and goes, oh, I don't want those books in that box, and they take half of them out. And you go to lift it and boom, you hit yourself on the face with it because you're ready to lift this big heavy thing, right? Or sometimes you go into an office building and the door looks like it's aluminum and really light, and you go to pull it and you pull yourself into the door because you weren't ready for the weight of the door. It's interesting. Your brain is always guessing how heavy something is, and it's sort of pre-recruiting the number of muscle fibers it's going to need to do that. And if it ever misguessed, you always get a surprise with that. So in skeletal muscle, every one of these muscle fibers is independent. They may be activated in groups because they're all on the same neuron, but only as many groups as is needed to do the job are pulled into any one activity. And even sometimes if you've got to grab something and hold it for a while, if you've got to pull on something and hold it, sometimes the brain will rotate through. It'll use these, and when these get tired, then it'll use these, and then when those get tired, it'll use some others. And so it can kind of go through a muscle and use many, many different groups of muscle fibers to keep the pressure on. Question? When you twitch, if you get a little tick, usually that's the brain firing some muscles for some reason. It's often, if you've got a little, if it's a little twitch thing, a cramp, if you get a muscle cramp, that's really in the muscle itself. That's in the muscle fibers. It's got something to do with the release of calcium. Too much calcium is being released. But a little tick or a little twitch is usually the brain just misfiring those muscles for some reason. It's often emotionally connected. When people are under pressure, a lot of pressure, they often get a little tick. Yeah. But it's when you're under pressure, isn't it? It's a psychological thing here in the brain. It's not the muscle. That's if she's constantly doing this, right? That's the brain. That's not the muscle. Yeah, that's the brain. That's having to raise you. Right? We parents, we get it, trying to raise kids properly, Anyway. Or you know what this comes to also Have you ever got a membership at the gym and, went to work out to try and get your body in shape? Right? If you use the weight machines, which are real safe rather than free weights, with the stacks and you put the little pin in and then you can pull or push or whatever. When you do that, it's really fun at first because like the first 6 or 8 weeks, you can keep moving that pin down and down, and it's like, oh, I'm getting stronger and stronger and stronger. But then you always, after about 6 or 8 weeks, you'll hit a plateau. And then there's a lot of grinding work to try and increase the strength. And basically that's because for most of us, if you've never worked out, your brain has never had to use all the muscle fibers in a muscle before. It just uses a few here and then a few there. It uses some of these. But it's never had to recruit them all at once. And it takes several weeks for your brain to learn how to call on all your muscle fibers to do something, to bring them all to the task. Once you've learned how to do that, then the strength gains are only by the muscle fibers themselves building more myofibrils to actually increase the strength of every muscle fiber. But there's this learning thing, this recruitment thing, the brain learning to recruit. And it's kind of fun because, I'm lifting 10 pounds more this week and 10 pounds more the next week and 10 pounds, and most people gain pretty quickly at first. Yeah. Yes. When I first started working out, it's like I couldn't lift up a certain amount. Right. And when you stop, it's like you would think your strength goes away, but you can still lift up a certain amount. Does that stay? Your brain retains the memory of being able to recruit all of its muscle fibers, so you get it back much more quickly. In fact, some older people, especially if you get guys that worked out a lot and then they're sedentary for quite a while, for 10, 20 years, then they come back, they still got the memory and they can start, working pretty hard. The problem is with the connective tissues, because connective tissues adapt. Sometimes the muscle fibers can get stronger than the connective tissues. So people that come back to weight training later in life have to take it a little slower, a little more gradual, so that they don't outpace the strength of their connective tissues and wind up tearing something. The connective tissues will always be proportional to the strength of the muscle fiber. As the muscle fibers grow stronger, the connective tissues build more and more. But because you've got this memory, if you worked out once, you've got this memory, the muscles, fibers can outpace the connective tissues. And you can tear things a lot easier when you're older than when you're younger. So, got to be careful with that. This all relates to this. So, are the cells interconnected? No, they are not. These are all separate. Okay, and that's how you get this variety of strength within a muscle, by calling on them individually. Okay? Now, other characteristics that we want to look at. Let's look down at the lower part of the handout here. We're still looking at skeletal muscle. Is there sarcoplasmic reticulum here for storing calcium? Yes, there is. Are there transverse tubules here? Yes, there is. Okay. Where is the calcium? Okay. Where do we store the calcium? Sarcoplasmic reticulum, right? Calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, so it's immediately available to the myofibrils. Because these sarcoplasmic reticulums surround the myofibrils, calcium can get in there immediately, right? So we'll put sarcoplasmic reticulum is where that calcium is. Right? And this then directly affects the speed of the muscle. Right? What's the speed of contraction here? Yeah, very fast, right? Very, very fast, very rapid. Okay? And you witness, a baseball player being able to hit a 90, 95 mile an hour fastball, hockey goalies having to react to a slap shot, tennis players responding to tennis serves. And you've got to have an instantaneous response. And you can do that basically because the calcium is right there on top of the myofibrils, ready to enter instantly. Do you remember this nerve control, right? What's the word that we use when we can control it by with our conscious mind? Right, yeah, this is voluntary. This is voluntary, right? And what about the fatigue factor? Does this muscle get tired? Yes, it does. Yeah, you can train it. You can run a marathon, but you're going to be whipped at the end of it. There are people that run 50 and 100-mile races, but you can't just go forever. At some point, the muscle fatigues. It just can't go and go and go. There are other muscles that go and go and go for your whole life, right? Yeah, the heart, of course, right? So proportional to the others, this muscle does fatigue. It tires. Okay, so there's our characteristics for skeletal muscle. Now what we want to do is look at the other two types, and let's compare their characteristics to this. Okay? So let's do that. Let's start with cardiac muscle. Okay? The muscle here that forms the basic structure of the heart and some of its major blood vessels. There's some cardiac muscle that's partly out into some of the major blood vessels here. Okay, so on your chart, we're going to fill out this column now, right? And we're going to try and compare then to what we see. And one of these we can put in immediately. Which is the one that you know here? I don't see voluntary here. Yeah, you're right. When we get there, that's an easy one. But which one of these answers do you know right now? Location. Where is this? Yeah, it's in the heart, okay? It's the only place we find cardiac muscle. All right. So we've got the heart. Okay, now let's look at the cellular structure then of cardiac muscle. Here's some cardiac muscle tissue. Can you tell from this any of its characteristics? Can you see a little bit of striped stuff there? Okay, the stripes are a little more subtle, but they're there. Here's a picture that an artist has drawn from this, so it's a little more obvious, right? And I see fibers, don't I? I still see fibers, but what's different about the fibers here? Yeah, skeletal fibers are really long, but what's really different here is they're separate, they're sort of branched, right? Different, you don't have individual separate little, you have them connecting. If you look at a single muscle cell, here, the muscle cells, the cardiac muscle cells are individual. They've never fused into these long muscle fibers. So if we're talking about the size of a cardiac muscle cell, right, it's just a normal cell size. This would be like if the skeletal muscle fiber is the length of the football fields, this is just the football. And they are attached from one another. The cells are all attached to each other, but they're separate. So they make these long fibers, but the long fibers are made out of individual cells. Okay, so what would I put down for the nucleated? If this is a single cell, what does it have? Right, we're going to say mononucleated, right? Mono meaning one. So it's got a single nucleus. Okay, and the shape. Okay, here's a little bit of more of a three-dimensional picture. The cells, are they cylindrical? Yeah, and like focus on a single cell here. If you focus on a single cell, they're cylindrical, but you see how they're branched? Okay, branched is an important word here. because each individual cell will typically have a branch to another cell, what you have, I can go all the way around the circle here, can't I? From here to here, this one's connected to this one's connected to this one's connected to this. So you see what happens here? We wind up with literally almost every single cell being connected to every other cell. If I contract this cell, then what other cells contract? All of them contract, don't they? Right? They're all going to contract because they're all interconnected. You see, I don't want a heart contraction that is 50%. I don't want my heart to lift a piece of paper one moment and then have to lift a truck the next moment. Right? I want from my heart 100% contraction every single time. And I'll slow it down or speed it up if I need more pressure. But my heart gives me 100% every time, and literally because every cell is connected into every other cell here. Okay? If we look at the structure here, here's the same kind of a micrograph that we were looking at before. You see mitochondria here, you see vesicles, you see ribosomes, you see all this basic structure. Do you see sarcomeres here? Do you know what a sarcomere is? Okay, do you see Z discs and actin and myosin, all of that? There's a sarcomere. Right, I see sarcomeres, I see myofibrils, right? So I see that basic structure here. There are sarcomeres, right? Is this striated then? Yes, of course. I'm going to see the stripes, right? Because the sarcomeres are there. The sarcomeres, that overlapping creates the light and dark stripes. So this is constructed very much like skeletal muscle, isn't it? Cardiac is closely related. And what did we say about the interconnectedness? Yes, they are, right? The cells are all interconnected to one another so that if one contracts, basically they all contract. And that's an important part. That's one of the things that makes cardiac muscle stand apart from skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle, I can get precise contractions. With cardiac muscle, it's kind of like all or none. I get them all contracting together or I don't. I want 100% out of my heart with every beat. Okay. Let's look at the bottom part of your handout then. Flip that down to where we're looking here. And we need another picture. Here's a picture kind of like our conduction system, but here's conduction within the cardiac muscle cell. And you should see some differences here. Do you see sarcoplasmic reticulum? Yes, you do. Right? So there is sarcoplasmic reticulum here. But there are some differences in it. What's the big difference in the sarcoplasmic reticulum? There's what? Come on, help me out. What's the big difference here in this sarcoplasmic reticulum? You're talking so quietly I can hardly hear you. Oh, there's covering it. It's surrounding all the myofibrils. Something's missing. What is a triad? The T-tubules and the? Remember where you have a T-tubule, we have T-tubules here. T-tubules, you have big terminal cisterns, right? Remember the sarcoplasmic reticulum has these big storage chambers on either side of a T-tubule. Do you see those here? No. Okay, so how much calcium is there in here? Yeah, there is some, but not very much. Okay, now in this picture, the sarcolemma is colored blue instead of that sort of orangish color in our textbook. And notice that the T-tubules are blue too because they're made out of sarcolemma, aren't they? So where do you think the calcium is then? We've got transverse tubules. Where is the calcium? Okay? If it was just floating around in here, everything would be contracting. I got to keep the calcium away from the myofibrils to let them relax. Okay? The calcium is going to be what we call extracellular. Okay? The cell is going to have to move calcium across its cell membrane, across the sarcolemma, to get it in and out of the myofibrils. Now that's different than storing it. You've got a little in here. That's different than storing it right on top of the myofibrils. That's going to delay the process a little bit. And even the T-tubules are going to function. Some of the calcium is going to be stored in the T-tubules. But again, you've got to move it across a membrane that's like a cell membrane, not like the simple membrane of a sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? So we're going to say that the calcium is in the T-tubules and external. In the extracellular fluid would be another way to say that. So calcium is there. Now that's going to make the speed of contraction slightly slower. The heart can still beat fairly fast. Okay? You know, when somebody's running, their heart's beating pretty fast. Okay? But the beat of the heart, you know, if you look at an EKG and see the beating of the heart, it can't go too fast. What happens if the heart beats too fast? Pumps too much blood? There's no blood pressure? Huh? The blood pressure goes high? Or the blood pressure goes low? Okay? It's going to go high to a certain point, and then it's going to go low, right? It's like if the clapping of my hands is each beat of my heart. Am I clapping? Yeah, I'm clapping so fast you can't see, right? I'm not clapping. I'm clapping so fast now that I'm not even clapping at all. See, the heart, think about it. The heart is a bag, a muscular bag. It's got to fill with blood to squeeze blood out. Fill, squeeze, fill, squeeze, fill, squeeze, fill, squeeze. If I get too fast, there's no time to fill, right? So when a heart starts beating too fast, it doesn't beat at all. I mean, it doesn't pump any blood. It doesn't create any blood pressure. When the heart goes into fibrillation, you know, it's an odd circumstance. This is often, you know, when they put the paddles clear, you know, that thing. When they do that, typically the heart is either stopped or sometimes it's beating so fast that it's just shivering, it's just shaking. We say it's in fibrillation, or if it's going too fast, we say it's fluttering. It's just doing this. And it's not squeezing anything. The muscle's just shivering. And what we do is we shock it to try and stop it for a second, and then we hope that it's going to go back to its normal rhythmic pattern. So it's actually very important that the calcium has to move out and in and out and in, and that's what creates this sort of rhythmic beating of the heart. And it can come very fast, but you don't want it to come too fast, and it's not supposed to. But the conduction system here literally is part of the heart beating with this rhythmic action rather than getting into big trouble. So it can beat fast, but you don't want it to respond like skeletal muscle. And again, I'll say it one more time, it's that movement of the calcium across the cell membrane that helps make a pause there so that the heart can fill. What? Sure. No. Heart murmur is totally different. And I don't mean to put you off here, but in about 2-3 weeks, we're going to go in and out of the heart, and you'll know exactly structurally where a heart murmur comes from. Yeah. So we will deal with that. Exactly. How about this nervous control here? You know this one, right? right? Yeah. It's involuntary. You don't have anything to say about it. We should probably include that it's autorhythmic. What does that mean? What does that sound like it means? Where does the heartbeat come from? Autobiography? It comes from, if you do an autobiography, who writes it? Yourself, right? You yourself, right? Biography, I write a biography of Winston Churchill, but if I write an autobiography, I write it of myself. The rhythm comes from the heart itself. You can be brain dead and your heart will go on beating. You don't need a brain to cause the heart to beat. The rhythmic beating comes from the cell structure itself. Comes from it. And again, when we get to the cardiovascular system, we're going to look at the heart in depth. We're going to know all of its basic structure, and you're going to understand where this beating comes from. But you don't have anything consciously to say about it. You cannot control your heartbeat. What about fatigue? Right? Does this get tired? How long can it run? Right? An entire lifetime, right? You know, when you think how little rest the heart gets, an average heart rate is 72 beats per minute. There's only 60 seconds in a minute. So if your average heart rate is 72, you're beating more than once a minute. And the only rest the heart gets is that split second between beats, that tiny little pause so that it can fill with blood before it squeezes again. In surgery, they don't bring down your heartbeat. Sometimes they cool, for some important surgeries, they cool your whole body, which will slow your heart rate. But yeah, when you're lying, the slowest heartbeat you ever have is when you're asleep, or when you're lying down and you're relaxed.
On Friday, my son had a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
He was extubated, so his heartbeat was down to 50s.
Mm.
So he was in big trouble.
Yeah, 50 can be trouble.
The first thing that the doctor did was to squish blood. They made the catheter and squish blood out to measure the blood gas of his body.
To measure the...
Blood gas.
Oh, okay, to see if he's getting oxygenated?
He was getting
Yeah.
oxygen. So how is this different from the respiratory system?
Too big a question for right now. Okay? Otherwise, we won't have time to finish this. I can talk to you more about that later. But yeah, if the blood's moving too slowly through the lungs, you may not be delivering. It's like a slow delivery boy. If he's just taking his time, he's not going to get all his packages delivered. If you got to have a certain amount of oxygen out to the tissues, if you've got slow delivery, the tissues may not be getting enough oxygen. So, but anyway, sorry about that. But okay, so there's cardiac muscle, and really those two big things are the branch structure, which makes all the cells contract together, and this calcium thing, which makes it beat in a rhythmic way. But otherwise, as you saw in that one picture, it looks structurally very much like skeletal muscle with sarcomeres, myofibrils, that structure of actin and myosin that are going to contract. Okay? All right. Well, let's look at our third type then. Let's go to smooth muscle. Okay? So now we're going to look at this third column. And let's just go to location first. Where do I find smooth muscle? Do you know? Internal organs, right? Basically, we say hollow organs and tubes would be primary. There are going to be a few other examples, but the majority of it is in hollow organs and tubes, which would be like the digestive system here that you see. Female reproductive system, right? There's muscle throughout. There's smooth muscle here. Urinary system, the bladder, the ureters, blood vessels, right? Arteries and veins are made out of layers, and some of the layers are muscle. So we find smooth muscle lots of places where we need some kind of movement or some kind of force or squeezing or whatever. Many of the tubes in the body are made so that they squeeze things through them, like the digestive system. So basically we would say hollow organs and tubes throughout the body. Now let's look at the cellular structure of smooth muscle so that we can talk about the cellular structure. Here's what it looks like under a microscope, right? And basically you can see from this why they call it smooth muscle. Don't you like that word smooth? Doesn't it sound like what it is? Smooth, right? Onomatopoeia, right? It sounds like what it is, smooth. Isn't that a soothing word? Soothe, smooth. Okay. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. If you look at, this is really what it looks like. You know, you can't see as much under the microscope. It takes looking at lots and lots of microscope slides before you can really say, oh, this is really what it looks like. So I've got individual muscle cells here. The size, they're a little bit longer. You know, if this is the size of a cardiac muscle cell, then there may be 3 or 4 times longer, but they're not extremely long like skeletal muscle is. So the smallest cell size would be cardiac. Smooth muscle, the cells are a little long. Skeletal muscle fibers are extremely long. Okay? Because they're individual here, the nucleus, we would say, mononucleated again, right? And the description of the shape, notice how they're wide in the center and then they taper at the ends. The term we use for that is spindle-shaped. A spindle is a shape where it's a long cylindrical thing, but it tapers to the ends. So we're going to use the term spindle-shaped here. Now, if we look at the electron micrograph, and by the way, you can download these and print them if you want to take some time and look at these. I'm not going to put these on the test, but sometimes looking at these, you get a much better understanding, which helps you remember better. This picture right here has 2 cells in it. I'll color them separately. We'll color this one sort of blue. So there's one and here's the other. And you can see it's going to be wide where the nucleus is, right? And then you can see it just sort of tapers off. You can even see this big bunch of mitochondria here is tapering, isn't it? So there's one there, and we'll color this one the other color. So you can see there's 2 distinct cells side by side here. Now, when you look at this, do you see sarcomeres here? I don't see any sarcomeres. Do you see myofibrils? No, I don't see those tube-like structures. I don't see the actin and myosin and all of that. And of course, that's why this isn't striated, right? So I don't see sarcomeres. That's a no. Is it striated? No, because it takes that sarcomere overlapping thing to get the light and dark stripes. This is why it's called smooth muscle, because it's not striped. So, you know, you got to think way back when they named this stuff with the first people looking under microscopes. They didn't see the stripes like that, so they used the stripe characteristics that they could readily see to name the different types of muscle. So this is not striated. How does this stuff contract then? Do you think this has actin and myosin? Maybe. Yes, it does. Okay, it has to, or you don't have contraction, right? And you've got a nice picture. This is fairly new in our textbook too. I think this is just 1 or 2 editions old. You don't have to memorize this, okay? But just look at it. You see the green representing the myosin. You see the purple representing the actin. And notice I don't have Z discs and all of that. All of the actins are tied into these little dense bodies here. It's more of a network of structures, right? In this area right here, out on the outer edges here of these muscle cells, you've got this network of connecting links, right? You see these intermediate filaments and the little dense bodies create this network, and then the actins and myosins are attached within that. So they don't fall into neat rows making sarcomeres and stripes. They're just kind of all over the place here, but the actin and myosin still interact to create a contraction. See, here's a contracted cell, here's an uncontracted cell. Okay? So we still have actin and myosin. We have a contracting process. It just isn't organized like it is in myofibrils and sarcomeres in smooth and in skeletal and cardiac muscle. Now, the question of interconnectedness, okay? Are the cells interconnected? Here's a surprising answer, because the answer is yes and no, okay? Meaning that there are actually two different types of smooth muscle. So it's almost as if there were 4 different muscle types. There's 2 types of smooth muscle. Okay? Let's sort of lay this out. There's one that's called multi-unit, and there's one that's called visceral. And basically it comes down to this interconnected situation. One of these is and one of these isn't. Okay? The multi-unit is not interconnected, so this is functions like skeletal muscle. You can do this with precise control. The visceral smooth muscle is interconnected, so this one is more like cardiac muscle. If all the cells are interconnected, what kind of a contraction do I get? If all the cells are connected to one another, if one contracts, they all contract, right? Over here, if the cells are not interconnected, I can contract some or many or none, right? So I can get precise control over here. Here, I just get big contractions. Okay, examples. Here, with this precisely controlled movement, this would be like the pupil of your eye. It has multi-unit smooth muscle in it. Right? My brain is constantly adjusting the pupil of my eye in a very precise way to let just the right amount of light in so that my eye functions optimally. Too much light in your eyes, and what happens? Right? You get glare in your eyes and you can hardly see, right? Too much light washes out the chemicals that are responding to light. So the pupil of my eye, the little muscles here in the iris, are closing down and opening up the opening into the eye to let just the right amount of light in. Over here, visceral smooth muscle, you just have rhythmic, sort of pulsating contractions, kind of like the heart, the movement of food through the digestive tube. This is visceral smooth muscle. And it's just constantly pulsating and pushing the food little by little by little through the tube to get from the stomach to the anus. So 2 types. Basically, it's this, are they interconnected? One's interconnected and one is not. So it's that cellular structure that makes these 2 different. Okay. How about these other things here? Sarcoplasmic reticulum. Are there sarcoplasmic reticulum here? No, there isn't. Okay? We had smaller sarcoplasmic reticulum in cardiac muscle. Basically, none here. Transverse tubules? No. Okay? No transverse tubules here either. So basically, we've just got a cell membrane, and in places the cell membranes are connected so that they, in a visceral type, they're connected. In a multi-unit type, they're not. So where do you think the calcium is then? Extracellular. All the calcium is external. It's got to go through the cell membrane. Okay, it's got to go back and forth through the cell membrane, and again, that slows things down. But typically, smooth muscle does not have to respond quickly. It can take its time. There's no rush in digesting your food. It doesn't have to be done in the next 10 minutes. Right? Things like that. Okay? Or the smooth muscle in birthing a child, right? It's going to keep going, but it's going to take its time. Okay, so speed of contraction here, right? What would we say about the speed of contraction? Yeah, it's going to be slow, isn't it? Right? It's going to be slow. It's going to take its time. And basically that's due to two things, right? You've got the source of calcium external, and you don't have this real coordinated actin and myosin in those sarcomeres and myofibrils. So this is going to be a slower kind of contraction. Nerve control, voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary, right? I don't have anything to say about this, right? My brain, there are parts of my brain that help control this, but it's not something I can pay any attention to. What about fatigue? Does this muscle fatigue? Okay. You know, ask a woman who's having a child if she's getting tired or if her womb is getting tired. Right? The womb just keeps going on and on and on. She's getting tired, but the smooth muscle just keeps grinding away. Right? Closest we men ever get to that is probably when we've got, if you ever have food poisoning, ever been on, had some food poisoning or have the stomach flu or something, and you're sitting on the toilet and it's just, you're in a big knot down here. It just kind of goes, and just kind of, but you can feel those rhythmic contractions. It grabs and you're like, oh, will you quit? And then, it'll relax, it'll release for a minute, and then you can feel it coming again, and then it grabs again, and right? So, there is one very interesting thing about smooth muscle, though. Yeah, it's, you can get this if you're birthing a child, right? You get these big, long, heavy contractions. Smooth muscle has a molecular structure that creates a locking mechanism. They describe it as a latching mechanism, like a little latch. So what happens here is smooth muscle can contract and use energy to do that, but once it latches, it doesn't have to use any energy to hold the contraction. It contracts. It would be as if I lift something big and heavy, right? And then I could just lock this all in and just hold this right here without any effort, right? This is starting to get heavy, right? Holding it way out here at arm's length. And I'm using all this energy to keep holding this book up. And it's getting tiring. What if I could just lock this in and just relax my arm and it would just hold it right here? That's what smooth muscle can do. Smooth muscle can latch itself and just hold a contraction, la-di-da, no effort, right? That's why these pregnancy, like birthing contractions, big and heavy, these contractions of the visceral muscle in your digestive system, you can get these big, heavy, long contractions because the muscle can just lock itself in, doesn't use a lot of energy, and contracts. So it doesn't get tired, basically because it can save energy by using this locking mechanism to do that. All right, so there's smooth muscle. Let's summarize a couple of things now that we've seen here. Let's summarize some things about cardiac muscle that makes it so unique. Okay? Remember, it's the branched, interconnected cells, right, that keep them contracting together. They contract in unison. So I get sort of an all or none. I get 100% contraction from a heart every time, basically from its structure. Structure determines function, right? Sarcomeres and myofibrils. Okay, that organization gives me potentially rapid contractions, and then the external calcium moving back and forth slows things down to give me that pulsing contraction, right? So the heart can beat fast. It's got the sarcomeres and the myofibrils, but it's got this external calcium that gets everything to be more rhythmic to it. So those are key differences in structure that results in the heart muscle performing a little different than skeletal muscle. Now with smooth muscle, and we have the two types here, right? We have the interconnected and the non-interconnected cells, and that's really the big distinction here between the two types. One performs more like skeletal muscle, one performs more like cardiac, and not so much fatigue or speed, but more like one's rhythmic and one's not. Right? There's no sarcomeres or myofibrils here. So we've got a little bit slower interaction here between the actin and the myosin. The calcium has to kind of slowly diffuse through the cell membrane, right? And all the calcium is external, so that makes this muscle slower. It's slow to contract. It's slow to relax. It's just overall slower. But you want to think of these two distinct types as well when you think about smooth muscle. Okay, so these are the characteristics structurally that make smooth muscle and cardiac muscle function differently than skeletal muscle. Any questions about these? You good with this? Yeah, I'm just kind of pausing. I see some people still writing. Okay, abbreviate some of this. You don't have to write down every single word here. Okay. You know what, I'll put this back up if you want to copy some more. We're going to take a break here in a sec. Just make sure you've got all of these basic details here. Right? Here and, of course, here at the bottom part. Yes, yeah, this lecture, I've kind of updated it a little bit. So there's one like this on Blackboard. In the next couple of days, I'll have this processed, and I'll have this very one that I did today up in place of the one that's there. They're not that much different. If you want to look at them ahead of time, you can. But yeah, you want to review this, kind of like going on looking at a YouTube video. You know, you can watch this and hear me talk my way through it. This very one I'm doing right now is not there yet. Probably tomorrow. I'll probably be able to process it maybe late tonight, get it up. Okay, well, good. I hope now that you've got a good understanding